Man, I gotta tell you about this one time. A time I honestly still can't shake off it. All started out so normal. Like any other weekend. I was just hanging out at my buddy Ryan's house. You know, the usual stuff. We were watching the game, grabbing some beers, and chatting about life. You know how it is. Just two guys talking about anything and everything. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then his mom walked in, and honestly, I didn't think anything of it. At first. I mean, sure, she was always around Ryan's mom, who's in her 40s. Don't get me wrong. She's always been nice. A little too friendly, maybe. But I never really thought much about it. She'd come over and chat with us. Tell us to keep the noise down. That kind of thing. Nothing too crazy. Right? But on that day felt different. It wasn't like she had dressed any differently. She wasn't trying to act a certain way. No. It was the way she looked at me. She'd always been polite. But now there was something else in her eyes. Like there was a story she was holding back. Something she wanted to say but didn't. And it was only when Jake stepped out of the room to grab some snacks that had happened. She leaned in closer. A little too close. And then she said something that completely threw me off. You know, I've always noticed how you look at me. She said, her voice quieter than usual. There was this pause, like she was waiting for me to respond. And I didn't know what to do. I swear I froze for a second. She wasn't joking. It wasn't a playful comment. There was something about it that felt deliberate. And I could tell deep down that this wasn't just some casual re-on. She was trying to say something more. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions. But you can't help but notice when someone gives you that kind of attention. And Ryan's mom, well, let's just say she wasn't the type of woman to normally cross any boundaries. So what was going on here? I kept quiet, unsure of how to even respond. And that's when she did something I never expected. She smiled. But it wasn't the usual smile. This one was different. I tried to play it cool. But something inside me was telling me that I should walk away. But for some reason, I didn't. My heart was racing a little bit. What was I supposed to do? She wasn't giving me any way out. Just then, I heard Jake coming back down the stairs, and she straightened up quickly, like nothing had happened. I looked at her, and she gave me this look. One that said, "We're not done here." And as if nothing happened, Jake walked in and handed me another beer, like everything was just normal. But deep down, I felt like something had shifted, and I couldn't quite figure it out. It was a weird feeling, and I couldn't shake it. What had just happened? And why was she looking at me that way? So, yeah, I thought it was probably just a weird moment, one of those things that doesn't mean anything, right? At least that's what I told myself. But as the evening went on, it started to become clear that this wasn't going to stay in the past. And I had no idea just how far this would go. I kept telling myself I was just overthinking it. I mean, it had been a long night and Ryan's mom was just being herself. Right? But the thing is, it didn't feel like nothing. I couldn't shake the look she gave me. It was like a hint. Like she was daring me to cross a line to do something that I knew wasn't right. Shaw and I ended up staying up late just talking about random stuff, and his mom eventually went to bed. I tried to act like nothing had changed, but my mind kept replaying that moment, and it wasn't just the look. It was the way she'd said it too. "I've always noticed how you look at me." It was like she was expecting something from me. Maybe she was just teasing. I don't know. But that feeling kept lingering the next day. Things felt off. I showed up at Ryan's place again, thinking we'd hang out like usual, but it wasn't the same. Ryan's mom greeted me at the door, but it wasn't the casual, "Hey, how's it going?" like usual. No, this time. There was something different in her tone. It was more inviting, or maybe it was just me. "Good to see you, sweetie," she said. And I swear, I could have sworn there was an edge to it. But before I could react, she asked if I'd help her with something, just some light yard work. Nothing big? I figured sure. Why not? Sean was still in the kitchen, and I didn't mind lending a hand. She led me outside, and as we were working on the garden, it was clear she was trying to keep me close. Not physically, but with the way she kept leaning in when she spoke. The little touches on my arm whenever she handed me a tool. I tried to keep it cool, but the vibe was getting harder to ignore. The whole time she kept looking at me like she was waiting for me to make the first move. I kept my distance, didn't want to do anything stupid. But as the minutes ticked by, I could feel the tension between us growing. And then out of nowhere, she said it. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other night," she said, her voice low. I turned to look at her, and she was staring at me, a hint of something mischievous in her eyes. I could feel my heart rate pick up, and I knew that this was no casual conversation. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. "I think you know exactly what I mean." She said, that same smile creeping across her face again, but it wasn't playful. It was almost daring, as if she was challenging me. "Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why didn't you just walk away? Right?" But man, the way she was looking at me, I couldn't. My mind was telling me to leave, to walk away and forget all of it. But my body, it was telling me something else. It was like she had this pull on me, and I'm standing there trying to make sense of everything. When she steps closer to me, she's so close now, I can feel her breath, and I swear to God, it's like the world stopped for a second. I know I should have stepped back, said something, but I couldn't. My head was racing. She just kept looking at me like she was waiting for me to do something, to say something. But before I could even figure out what I was feeling, I heard a noise from inside the house. Jake, he was coming out, and just like that, the moment was over. She backed off, straightened up, and I swear it was like nothing happened. Like she hadn't just been standing so close to me. Like she hadn't just made things complicated. Jake walked outside, smiling like he hadn't seen a thing. And I had to play it cool, but I swear in that moment I felt like I was losing control of something that had been building all this time, and I didn't know how far it would go. It felt like the air between me and Jake's mom was heavier every time I saw her. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But every time we hung out, whether it was for a game or just grabbing a bite, there was this thing hanging between us. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Ryan was my buddy and his mom. Well, she was his mom, but the way she was acting, the way she looked at me, it felt like something was brewing. So, a few days later, I was at Ryan's place again. We were all hanging out in the living room, talking about life, just normal stuff. But then, as usual, Jake stepped out to grab some snacks, and that's when she made her move. I didn't even see it coming. She walked into the room casually, as if she wasn't about to drop a bomb on me. "You know," she started, her voice slow, "I've been thinking, maybe we should take this to the next level. I'm not going to lie." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't ready for that. I mean, she was Shaw's mom. The thought of anything happening between us felt wrong, like I was crossing a line that I didn't want to even think about. But she wasn't backing down. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my cool. Even though my heart was pounding, she took a step closer, and for the first time I could smell her perfume. It was strong, almost too strong, and I could feel the tension in the air like it was suffocating me. She wasn't playing around anymore. "I mean, I know what you've been thinking," she said, her voice dropping low. "I can see it in your eyes. You want more, and I want more too. For a second, all I could do was stare at her. Was she seriously saying, this? Was this really happening? But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't just stand there and act like nothing was going on. I backed away a little, trying to think straight. I don't think this is a good idea. I stammered, but the words didn't feel real. Because deep down, I was feeling something I couldn't ignore, something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. She chuckled softly, like she was enjoying watching me squirm. Why not? She asked, her eyes narrowing. What's the worst that could happen? I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain to her that I knew this was wrong? But I also couldn't deny the pull I felt toward her. The more I stood there, the harder it became to fight it. Just then, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Jake. I felt like I'd been caught in some kind of trap. I didn't know what to do, how to act, so I just froze. She stepped back, straightening herself up in a way that made it clear she knew what she was doing, like she was aware of every little thing happening between us. When Shaw entered the room, everything went back to normal. At least on the surface. He tossed me a bag of chips and sat down, completely oblivious to the tension that was hanging between me and his mom. If you find this story interesting, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Let's continue listening to the story. The worst part, I felt like it was only just starting. The thing that made it all even weirder was how normal everything seemed when Jake was around. Like we'd just go back to laughing and joking, like nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget it. Every time Jake left the room, it felt like the air thickened, like something was about to break. It was so subtle, but I could feel it. And I'm telling you, I don't know how much longer I could pretend like I wasn't caught in some weird twisted game. A few days passed, and I kept trying to keep things normal, to brush everything off. I mean, we weren't doing anything wrong, right? It was just those looks, those words. I kept telling myself it was just me reading too much into things. But every time I walked into Shaw's house, there was that feeling. Again. Ryan had gone out to run some errands, leaving me alone with his mom. She had called me into the kitchen to help with dinner, but I knew that wasn't the real reason. No, she was planning something, and I could feel it. She had this way about her now, the way she moved, the way she spoke. It was like she knew what I was thinking. Like she had a hold on me as I walked into the kitchen. She turned to face me with that same smile, the one that made my stomach do flips. "I hope you're hungry," she said, her voice soft, almost sweet, but there was something underneath it, something that made me feel both nervous and excited at the same time. I shrugged it off, trying to act casual. "Yeah, I'm starving," I replied, looking around the kitchen, trying not to focus on her, but she didn't make it easy. She moved closer, just a little too close, and I could feel her breath on my neck as she set a plate down on the counter. "I've been thinking," she said, and I could tell by the way her voice dropped that this was going to be one of those conversations I wasn't ready for. "I think you know exactly what I want, and I know what you want too." My heart skipped a beat. The words were out there now. I was standing in the kitchen with Shaw's mom, and she was basically telling me she knew what I was thinking. I tried to back away, but she reached out and placed a hand on my arm, holding me in place. "You're afraid, aren't you?" she whispered, and I swear, I could feel the heat radiating off of her. "You're afraid of what might happen if you let this go any further." I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. There was a part of me that was scared, terrified even. But there was another part, one that was pushing me to take a step closer, to give in. Whatever this was, I wanted to pull away, to just walk out of the kitchen and forget this whole thing ever happened. but every time I tried to leave, she would pull me right back. She leaned in. Then her face inches from mine, and I could feel her warm breath on my skin. "You don't have to be scared," she said softly. "I won't bite unless you want me to." The words hung in the air, and I could feel my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Was she playing some kind of game, or was she serious? Was this really happening, or was it all just in my head before I could react? I heard Shaw's voice from the other room. "Hey, you guys almost done in there?" He sounded like he was coming back inside, and I knew I had to get out of there fast. But when I pulled away, she just smiled at me like nothing had happened. She stepped back casually, as if everything was perfectly fine, and I was left standing there, my heart racing, trying to catch my breath. Jake came into the kitchen, all smiles and laughter, not knowing anything, but I knew something had changed, and I could feel it. It wasn't over. The worst part was that I wasn't sure if I wanted it to end. I don't know what it was that made me stay. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, or maybe it was that feeling that I was somehow caught in her web, unable to get out. But whatever it was, it had a hold on me, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. A few days later, Ryan invited me over to hang out again, the usual stuff. Right? Just me, him, and some beers. But when I showed up, something was off. Jake wasn't there yet. He was running late, and guess who was home? Yep, Jake's mom. She greeted me at the door again, and for a second I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe things weren't as weird as they felt last time. But then I stepped inside, and there it was again, that tension, that unspoken understanding between us that felt like it was just waiting to explode. She was standing in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, looking at me with that same expression, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. "I'm glad you're here," she said. Her voice soft, almost too soft. "I thought maybe we could talk, about everything that's been happening." I froze. She wasn't being subtle anymore. She wasn't beating around the bush. She wanted to talk about this, whatever this was between us. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew her smile was all kinds of dangerous now. "Oh, you know exactly what I mean," she said, stepping closer. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we've been avoiding." My heart started racing, and I felt a cold sweat starting to form on my back. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to feel the way I was feeling. But every time she got close, I felt this pull, this magnetic attraction that was impossible to ignore. She put the glass down on the coffee table, and I swear she was looking right through me. "I know you're scared," she said, "but you don't have to be." I backed up a step. "I don't think this is a good idea," I said, even though my voice was shaky. Even though my body was betraying me, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my mind screaming at me to walk away. But I didn't. I couldn't. And then she did it. She stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm, and for a second I thought my heart was going to stop. "You don't have to be afraid of what you're feeling." She whispered, her voice so close now, so intimate. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want you to stop fighting it." I swear in that moment, I thought I was going to lose it. I thought I was going to give in to let her pull me in completely. But before I could do anything, I heard the front door open. Jake. I snapped out of the trance I was in, and in an instant, everything was back to normal, or at least it seemed like it. Jake walked in, all smiles, completely unaware of the tension in the room. "Hey man, sorry, I'm late," he said, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I could barely even look at him. How was I supposed to face him after what had almost happened? What had almost happened? But Jake was his usual self, chatting about something random, and for a second I thought, maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe she didn't really mean any of it. But the way she looked at me, the way she smiled, I knew that it wasn't over. I just didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending that nothing was going on. The next few days were a blur. Honestly, I tried to shake off everything that happened, but it was impossible. I kept thinking about her, about those moments when she got too close, when she said things that made my skin tingle. I tried to act normal when I was around Jake, but whenever I was alone with his mom, that tension was back, and it felt like it was only getting worse. One afternoon, Jake asked me to come over again. He was doing something with his car, so I was just supposed to hang out with his mom. No big deal, right? But as soon as I stepped into their house, I could tell something was off. Ryan's mom was in the living room, but she wasn't acting like her usual self. She wasn't as warm as friendly. No, this time, she had that serious look in her eyes, the one I'd seen before, the one that told me she was thinking about something big. Hey. She greeted me, but it was different this time. There was no smile. No small talk. Sean's going to be a while, so I thought we could talk that work again. Talk, but I already knew what it meant, and I had no idea how to respond. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was already pounding in my chest. What about? She glanced at the door, making sure Jake wasn't about to walk in. It's about us, she said, her voice low, almost like a whisper. I think you know what I'm talking about. I felt my throat go dry. I wanted to back away to get out of there, but I couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on mine, and I felt like she was pulling me in, making it impossible to escape. Why don't you sit down? She said, motioning to the couch. We need to have a real conversation, one where we stopped pretending this thing between us isn't there. I took a seat, but every part of me was telling me to leave, to get up and walk out. But I couldn't. Not. Now she sat down next to me, too close for comfort. I could smell her perfume again, that same scent that had become a reminder of all the weirdness. Her body was just a little too close, her knee brushing against mine, and I could feel her presence like she was consuming all the space around me. You don't have to be afraid. She said, her hand resting on my leg. I didn't pull away, even though my entire body was screaming at me to do so. I know you're conflicted. You don't have to hide it anymore. I want this. I want us. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe it. She was being so direct now. No more games, no more subtle hints. She was laying it all out there, and I was stuck right in the middle of it. She turned to face me, her eyes burning into mine. You don't have to pretend like you don't want this, she whispered. You've been looking at me the same way. I've been looking at you. We both know it. My heart was racing now. It was like the world had gone silent, and all I could hear was the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to say something to put a stop to it, but the words wouldn't come out. I couldn't speak. She leaned in closer, her lips almost brushing my ear. It's okay to admit it. You want this just as much as I do. I didn't know what to do anymore. My mind was a mess, and my body was betraying me. I felt this pull toward her, this undeniable attraction, and at the same time, I felt like I was drowning in guilt. How could I even think about this? She was Shah's mom. This was wrong on so many levels. But before I could even figure out what to say or do, the sound of the front door opening broke the silence. It was Jake. And just like that, the moment was over. I sat there frozen as Jake walked into the room, completely unaware of what had just almost happened. His mom quickly pulled her hand away from my leg and stood up as if nothing had happened at all. The tension that had been hanging in the air like a storm cloud vanished, replaced by the calm of normally, but I could still feel it lingering between us. The pull, the attraction. It wasn't gone, it never would be. Shaw smiled and W raved, like everything was fine. "Hey guys, what's up?" he said, walking in casually as if nothing in the world could be wrong. I just nodded, trying to act normal. Though my heart was still racing in my chest. My palms were sweaty, and I could barely make eye contact with either of them. I could feel her gaze on me, but when I looked up, her face was all smiles and warmth again. Like the conversation we just had never even happened. Like we hadn't been standing on the edge of something that could ruin everything. "Well, looks like we've got dinner ready," Shaw's mom said, breaking the silence. Her voice light and cheerful again. She was acting like nothing was different, but I knew something had shifted between us, and I knew it wasn't going away. Ryan didn't seem to notice anything off. He started talking about his day, telling us some funny story about his work, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I kept thinking about the moments we shared alone, the way she had leaned in so close, the way she had touched me, the way she looked at me like she knew everything I was feeling, the way she made me question everything I knew about myself. Dinner was awkward. It was all the usual small talk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken, something between me and her that couldn't be fixed. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I felt like a time bomb waiting to explode every time Jake left the room, every time his mom came close. I could feel it building again, like we were just waiting for the right moment to break all the rules. But was that moment ever going to come? Or was I just letting my mind get carried away? I didn't know. I didn't know what was real anymore, what was right, what was wrong after dinner. Jake was tired, so he went to bed early. I stayed behind to help clean up, just as I always did, but this time it was different. The house was quiet, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. Ryan's mom was in the kitchen washing the dishes, and I couldn't get the image of her face out of my mind. She turned to me and smiled, but there was something darker in her expression. "We need to finish what we started," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I felt my pulse racing again, the same way it did every time she came too close. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She wanted this. She wanted me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I was frozen. Everything I thought I knew was slipping away. But then, just as quickly as it had all started, I heard a noise from upstairs. It was Jake. He was awake again. The moment was gone for now.